According to him, the earliest form of exchange took place between entire social groups and involved the whole range of things people can do for each other, a stage he called the système des prestations totales. But his main interest is in the potlatch, a form of gift exchange involving aggressive competition between leaders of groups, prestations totales de type agonistique. The second chapter, dealing with this type, is the longest and the substantive core of the essay. Its title is important. The extension of this system, that is of prestation totale, liberality, honor, and money, monnaie, not argent. One of Mauss's key modifications to his uncle's legacy was to conceive of society as a historical project of humanity whose limits were extended to become ever more inclusive. The point of the gift is that society cannot be taken for granted as a pre-existent form. It must be made and remade, sometimes from scratch. How do we behave on a first date or on diplomatic mission? We make gifts. The moiety systems described in the first chapter are going nowhere. But the heroic gift exchange is designed to push the limits of society outwards. They are liberal in a similar sense to the free market, except that generosity powers the exchange, which is self-interested for sure, but not in the way associated with Homo economicus. Malinowski's account of the cooler ring is the contested origin for Mauss's discussion. Quote, "The whole intertribal cooler is merely the extreme case of a more general system. This takes the tribe itself in its entirety out of the narrow sphere of its physical boundaries and even of its interests and rights," end quote. So he's saying that no society is ever economically self-sufficient, least of all these Melanesian islands. So to the need for establishing local limits on social behavior must always be added the means of extending a community's reach abroad. This is why markets and money in some form are universal, and why any attempt to abolish them must end in catastrophe. Malinowski was adamant that the Trobriand cooler valuables were not money in the sense that they did not function as a medium of exchange and standard of value. But in a very long footnote, Mauss holds out for a broader conception, and I quote, "On this reasoning there has only been money when precious things have been really made into currency, namely have been inscribed and impersonalized and detached from any relationship with any legal entity, whether collective or individual, other than the state that mints them. Only one defines in this way a second type of money, our own," end quote. He suggests that primitive valuables are like money in that they, quote, "have purchasing power, and this power has a figure set upon it," end quote. He also takes Malinowski to task for reproducing the bourgeois opposition between commercial self-interest and the free gift, a dichotomy that many anthropologists have subsequently attributed to Mauss himself. There follows a chapter on survivals of these principles in ancient systems of law and ancient economies, societies which had specialist trade, impersonal money, and sale contracts in their modern form. Apart from offering a model of how we could go about doing the same thing for our societies, it need not detain us. His concluding chapter addresses the relevance of all this for contemporary societies, as you know. It has 3 sections. 1, moral conclusions. 2, conclusions for economic sociology and political economy. And 3, conclusions regarding general sociology and morality. The difficult term for us, as is Anglophones, is morale, because in this chapter alone it refers to moral science, morality, customs, and spirit, that is, morale in the sense that the English use the word. Mauss's chief ethical conclusion is that the attempt to create a free market for private contracts is utopian and just as unrealizable as its antithesis, a collective based solely on altruism. Modern capitalism rests on an unsustainable attachment to one of these poles, and it will take a social revolution to restore a humane balance. If we were not blinded by ideology, we would recognize that the system of prestation survives in our societies, in weddings and Christmas, in friendly societies, and more bureaucratic forms of insurance, even in wage contracts and the welfare state. Okay, thank you. I'll probably go for 20 minutes. With regard to the economy, Mauss, who had already claimed that the cooler valuables are money, takes Malinowski to task, as I've said, for reproducing in his typology of transactions the ideological opposition between commercial self-interest and the free gift. There are two prerequisites for being human. We must each learn to be self-reliant to a high degree and to belong to others, merging our identities in a bewildering variety of social relations. Much of modern ideology emphasizes how problematic it is to be both self-interested and mutual. Yet the two sides are often inseparable in practice, and some societies, by encouraging private and public interests to coincide, have managed to integrate them more effectively than ours. Human institutions everywhere are founded on the unity of individual and society, freedom and obligation, self-interest and concern for others. The pure types of selfish and generous economic action obscure the complex interplay between our individuality and belonging in subtle ways to others. The economic movement from below that he advocated in his political journalism, that is syndicalism, cooperatives and mutual insurance, is a secular version of what can be found in archaic societies. Gift exchange and the movement for cooperative socialism are all founded on total social facts, in the sense that they bring into play the whole of society and all its institutions, legal, economic, religious and aesthetic. This is the challenge they pose for sociological method and for politics too. Perhaps the value of the gift may be usefully restricted to its role as a precursor of the mature ethnographic science that anthropology later became. It certainly cannot be read as a charter for contrasting the paired ideal types, gift economy and market or commodity economy. Whatever the differences between prestation and contracts involving purchase and sale, Mauss went out of his way to emphasize that the foundations of human exchange are universal. Capitalism has been built on an unsustainable and extreme version. The presence of other economic mechanisms in our societies has been hidden from view and marginalized by the dominant form. It is therefore both an intellectual and a political task to show that what else there is there and to make possible a new moral emphasis in economic life and law. Last paragraph. While the gift stands alone as an intellectual exercise, when he wrote it, Marcel Mauss was intensely active on all fronts at once, academic and political, in what turned out to be the peak years of his engagement with society, the early 1920s. Perhaps it is not essential to read his financial journalism in order to understand his greatest essay, written and published at exactly the same time. But I would argue that they are both indispensable to an effective grasp of the man. Certainly the dynamic understanding that he brought to the exchange rate crisis helps me to grasp why he was at once enthused by and critical of Malinowski's account of the cooler. Does it all add up to a coherent economic vision, placing Mauss on a par with Keynes or even Polanyi, with both of whom he has much in common? Perhaps not. But if we ask what relevance he might have to our times of economic crisis, Investigation of his essay in the context of his life and times would surely help us better to understand our own. And in that sense, at least for me, Mausss lives.